All right, I want to talk about what life was like being a fan of G.I. Joe as a kid in the 80s. So we're going to go back. This is back in the 80s now. We're talking. How you had to find out about the characters, how you had to learn about G.I. Joe. This is pre-internet. There weren't just lists readily available to you of every character and what they look like and this and that. You know, it took a little bit to understand this world and find everybody in it, and you know, so that's kind of what this video is about. Comic books were a fantastic way to learn about G.I. Joe. They were a great source of material for getting to know the characters, understanding the world, understanding the chain of command. You got to see a core cast of characters kind of run a lot of missions and find creative ways out of life-threatening situations and stop Cobra from taking over the world or wreaking havoc. I didn't have the comic books. I wasn't even aware of them. I wish I would have been. I would have read some, but I didn't know that they existed. So a lot of you guys out there, the comics was a heavy part of your understanding the world of G.I. Joe. I didn't have the comics, so I gathered intel on G.I. Joe outside of the comic books. The cartoon was kind of the main source of material for me. I got two brothers. Every day after school, we'd come home and we'd watch G.I. Joe. We'd watch He-Man and Transformers and whatever else was on. But, you know, we watched the G.I. Joe. When the movie came out, we loved that. We watched that all the time. The comics seem a little more serious to me, where the cartoon kind of seemed like it was more fun. They're both fun. They're both serious. But, you know, that's just kind of my take on it. Another way of learning about G.I. Joe was going to be the commercials. The commercials for the toys, they were just 30 seconds or whatever, but you could see some figures in the background that you didn't have. You learned about the new toys, and there you go. And then the actual toy store. So you could go to KB or Toys R Us, or what was the one with the panda? You know, they had all the toy stores out there, and you go and you look at the shelf and you could see everything. When I was there, you know, when my mom took us there for something, you know, it usually was not for us. She's got to buy a birthday present for my cousin or something. So we're going to go, but we're just going in and out. We're not staying long. So you got a couple minutes to find the G.I. Joe and just scan everything and just take it in and try to remember things. But it was exciting. And if you were lucky, Mom would let you pick one out and take it home too. So that was always nice. And then on the back of the carded figures, there was always a good little chart with all the figures that they had for that year. I didn't realize it was for year necessarily at the time, but I think that's what it was. And then some of the sub teams would just have, you know, just that team or whatever. But you could look and there would just be these tiny little squares all over the back. That was basically the artwork from the card that was going to be on the front, but just shrunk way down. And you could look at it and be like, oh, okay, here's this guy, Crystal Ball. He looks interesting. I don't have him. And then you learn about that way. And if you took it home, then you could cut it out. I always kind of cut them out and save them and stuff so I could look at them and think about it and stuff. But that was another way of figuring it out, just by looking at the back of the actual toy. But sometimes those were just such a tease, because you could pick out a figure that you really wanted, but next time you went to the toy store, and the next couple times you were you know, in a store that had G.I. Joes, if they didn't have that guy that you wanted, you know, you're just out of luck. And you know, sometimes that was heartbreaking, you know, just never finding the figure that you really wanted, and time passes and then they're just not in stores anymore, and that's the end of it. Garage sales were another awesome way to find G.I. Joes. For those of you who don't know what a garage sale is, if people would, you know, put folding tables out in their driveway in their garage, and they'd throw a bunch of their stuff on it and put low price tags on it, and you could walk up to their house and buy things out of it. They still have garage sales, but I got the feeling that there's people out there that don't know what that is. My parents worked, and in the summertime when we didn't have school, we were dropped off at my grandmother's house for the day and then taken back home when my parents got off at night. And so we, you know, spent a lot of the summer at grandma's house. And on Thursdays, That was garage sale day in their neighborhood, and we'd go out and we'd have a couple bucks in our pocket, and we'd go hit 2 or 3 garage sales, and you could find GI Joes there. And they were, and it was like a quarter or 50 cents or something. I mean, granted, yeah, we're talking about like the mid 80s. I mean, the prices were different, of course, anyways, but I found some amazing stuff at garage sales. I found Torpedo at a garage sale, and Deep Six. And both those guys, at least at the time, I thought that they came out before I started collecting. I think Torpedo definitely did, although I think Deep Six was probably more in my range and I just didn't realize it. But anyways, when I got those, that was really special because as far as I was concerned, those guys were never going to be available again. I would never be able to find them because I kind of missed it. And holding those in my hands and just looking at them, they were like, I felt like like in high school, I'm a freshman and Torpedo's a junior or a senior, I'm like, wow, he's older than me, this means something. And he wasn't older than me. I mean, he was like, 2 years old or something. And I was like 7, but I still, I don't know, that's just kind of how I saw it. And I just had this like respect for him for that reason, I guess. I found that tank, the Wolverine that CoverGirl comes with. I didn't find it with her, it was just the tank. It was missing some of the missiles in the back and a piece or two was busted off of it or whatever, but it was like $1.50. And ironically, I never heard of CoverGirl, never knew who she was until they put her out in classified series. The last way you could find out about G.I. Joe was through just other kids. At school, you could talk about G.I. Joe with your friends and maybe work out a trade. Trade you Zartan for Firefly. Bring him in tomorrow. That sounds good, dude. Let's do it. Also, when you're a kid, I mean, kids make friends with each other so easily. So we made friends with just other kids on the street or in the neighborhood or whatever that also played with G.I. Joe. And you'd find yourself at some kid's house playing with G.I. Joe. You'd bring some of yours, you'd play with his, you'd check them out. You'd see repaints and different variations of characters that you knew, and you'd see characters that you never heard of or never seen before. And that's kind of what I'm talking about is just discovering other characters through this network that you'd basically create with other kids. My parents, they'd have friends and they'd work during the week, and then on a Friday night or something, they'd go to their friend's house to sit around, and they would play cards, and they would have some drinks, and the record would be playing, and they'd be laughing, hanging out in the dining room. And we would go with them, and the people's house that we were at, they had kids who played with G.I. Joe too. So we just met all these kids that we didn't really know. We only hung out with a few times, and they would have different G.I. Joes than we knew of, and that was exciting. And I remember back in those days, like I had real sticky hands because I would come home with all kinds of G.I. Joes in my pocket that weren't mine. I don't know what happened. But that was how it goes, I mean, kids steal from each other. That was the game. Sometimes you'd lose some G.I. Joes, sometimes you'd gain. We didn't lose any, but other kids did. There was a kid who lived down the street. We knocked on his door one day and his mom answered, and she's like, no, he can't come out and play because 22 of his G.I. Joes are missing. And we were like, oh, all right, well, okay, bye. And we just never played with him again. He was never our friend again. But we were G.I. Joe friends. We weren't real friends, so that's okay. Although I take that back. I did lose a G.I. Joe that sticks in my mind, at least. We went to a beach. It was just some local lake in the park or something, but it had sand, so I guess it was a beach. And, we were there as kids playing, and I went out to the water with a couple Joes up to my waist or something, and one fell in, and I searched around, and I never found it. So at the beach, I lost Beachhead. And that was how it went. You go to the beach, you go to a lake, you go camping, you go, on a family vacation, you go to grandma's house for Christmas. Wherever you went, you always took some Joes with you. We always had a few in our pocket. if it was going to be somewhere we were going to be for a couple days, I'd bring my whole collection. I had a camera bag. It was a over the shoulder strap. I found it in the closet at home, and I threw all my GI Joes in there, and then in the front there was a zipper pouch, and you could throw all the weapons and file cards in there. So everything was kind of organized, and you could just pick it up and go, and they were all with you. And we'd take them and we'd go camping somewhere. And during the day, Flint and Lady J and Shipwreck and Hawk, and they would go and they would fight against Big Boa and Destro and Baroness and whoever, and they'd have their little adventure in the woods on the campsite. But when it came time to settle down for the night and get in your tent and go to sleep, and I got in my little pup tent by the fire, Flint and Lady J, I mean, they were making bacon. They had their time. They'd get together. They were making what I thought was bacon, at least as a child. It was a lot of making out, some crotch touching, some dry humping. I mean, they had their needs too. It's natural. I don't see why I'm on trial here. And now as an adult, I can research G.I. Joe and look up every figure from every year and see all these characters, because sometimes the classified line will come out with a figure that I've never heard of. Like I mentioned, CoverGirl. I never heard of CoverGirl before. I looked her up, and she was, I thought maybe she was a new character, like someone that came along after my time, but she wasn't. She was there probably before I even started collecting, actually, and I just never came across her, with the network of other kids, and with the cartoon, and with the store and the toys and everything and the commercials. CoverGirl was just someone I was never aware of. So that's kind of my point. You could love G.I. Joe, be way into it as a kid, and go years and years and completely miss certain figures. Never hear of them, never see them. And that's a real foreign concept right now, but that was very realistic back in the day, and that's what happened. All right, well, hey, that's all I wanted to say. I just kind of wanted to reminisce a little bit, and kind of just to talk about the history of what it was like at the time of being a kid and how you had to figure out G.I. Joe. But you guys take it easy. All right, get out there, have sex with somebody. G.I. Joe.